The snowflakes had turned from gentle dancers to vicious daggers against Katherine Jefferson's face, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die in the Wyoming wilderness on December 14th, 1878. She had been foolish. Utterly, completely foolish. The stagecoach driver had warned her about the weather, told her they should wait until morning to make the journey from Cheyenne to the small mining camp where her brother worked. But Katherine had been stubborn, insistent that she needed to reach him before Christmas. Now the overturned coach lay somewhere behind her in the whiteout, the driver dead from a broken neck, the horses scattered, and Katherine stumbling through snow that reached her knees with nothing but a thin traveling cloak and boots meant for city streets. Her fingers had stopped hurting an hour ago, which she knew was a terrible sign. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she felt almost warm now, drowsy even. The wind shrieked through the pines like a woman screaming, and Katherine could barely see 3 feet ahead. She had left the coach hoping to find shelter, but now she realized she had condemned herself to freezing to death in the open. She fell for what must have been the 100th time, and this time she could not find the strength to rise. The snow beneath her face felt soft, almost comfortable. Maybe she could rest for just a moment, just close her eyes for a few seconds. "Please, God," she whispered, though the wind stole her words immediately. "I do not want to die alone out here." The darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, and Katherine surrendered to it. She woke to warmth and pain. The warmth was wonderful, spreading through her limbs like honey. The pain was excruciating, a burning sensation in her hands and feet that made her cry out. "Easy now," a deep voice rumbled. "That is the frost coming out of you. It will hurt fierce, but it means you still have all your fingers and toes." Katherine forced her eyes open and found herself staring at a ceiling made of rough-hewn logs. She was lying in a bed piled with furs and wool blankets, and the warmth was coming from a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The room was small but solid, the kind of cabin built to withstand the harsh mountain winters. The man standing beside the bed was the largest human being Katherine had ever seen. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. His hair was dark brown and long enough to brush his collar, and his beard was thick and well kept. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling shade of blue-green that reminded her of a frozen mountain lake. He looked to be perhaps 30 years old, weathered by the elements but undeniably handsome in a rough, untamed way. "Where am I?" Katherine managed to croak out. Her throat felt raw. "My cabin," the man replied. "About 15 miles north of Shoshone City. Found you half buried in a snowdrift near the creek. You had maybe another hour before you would have been past saving." "The coach," Katherine said, trying to sit up. "The driver, he dead," the man confirmed, his expression grim. "I found him too. Already buried him as best I could in this weather. The ground is frozen solid, so I marked the spot. We can do a proper burial come spring thaw." Tears burned Katherine's eyes. "He tried to save me. When the coach tipped, he made sure I got out first." The mountain man was quiet for a moment, then said, "Then he was a good man. I am sorry for your loss." He moved to a rough-hewn table near the fireplace and ladled something from a pot hanging over the flames. "You need to drink this. It is just broth, but you need something warm in your belly." Katherine accepted the wooden bowl he offered, wrapping her aching fingers around it carefully. The warmth felt wonderful, and the broth tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten, though it was probably just simple meat stock with herbs. "I do not even know your name," she said after taking several sips. "You saved my life." "Xavier Cunningham," he replied, settling into a chair by the fire. "Most folks just call me Cunningham when they have reason to call me anything at all." Katherine Jefferson, she said. Kate to my friends. I was traveling to see my brother at the mining camp near the Wind River. Xavier's expression shifted slightly. That would be Dead Horse Camp. Rough place. My brother works there, Katherine said defensively. He is a surveyor, not a miner. He has been sending money home to our mother in Boston for the past 2 years. I meant no offense, Xavier said. Just stating facts. Mining camps draw all sorts, and not all of them savory. Your brother is likely one of the decent ones if he is sending money home. Katherine took another sip of broth, studying the man who had saved her life. His cabin was sparse but clean, everything in its place. Furs hung on the walls, and she could see snowshoes, traps, and other equipment carefully stored. A rifle rested above the door, and she spotted at least 2 other firearms within easy reach. "You live up here alone?" she asked. "Most of the time," Xavier confirmed. "I trap during the winter, hunt and prospect a bit in the summer. Go into Shoshone City every few weeks for supplies and to trade pelts. It is a quiet life, but it suits me." "You not get lonely?" Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly to read. "Sometimes. But the mountains are good company." The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Katherine shivered despite the warmth of the fire. "How long will the storm last?" "Could be days," Xavier said. "This one came on fast and hard. We are settled in for at least 3 or 4 days, maybe a week. I have plenty of supplies, so you need not worry about that." The reality of the situation hit Katherine fully. She was snowed in with a complete stranger, a man who lived alone in the wilderness, miles from any town or help. By all rights, she should have been terrified. But something about Xavier Cunningham made her feel safe. Maybe it was the gentle way he handled things despite his size, or the concern in his eyes when he looked at her. Or maybe she was just too exhausted to be properly frightened. "I am grateful you found me," she said softly. "Truly. I thought I was going to die out there." "You very nearly did," Xavier said bluntly. "Another hour and that would have been it. What possessed you to travel in weather like this?" Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Stubbornness, I suppose. The driver wanted to wait, but I insisted. I wanted to surprise my brother before Christmas. Now the driver is dead because of my foolishness." "He made his own choice," Xavier said. "Likely thought the weather would hold long enough to make it through. This storm came up faster than most. Even I barely made it back to the cabin in time." "Still," Katherine said, "his death is on my conscience." "Then honor it by staying alive," Xavier replied. "Drink your broth and rest. Your body has been through a trial. You need to recover your strength." Over the next few days, Katherine learned that Xavier Cunningham was a man of few words but steady presence. He rose before dawn each morning to check his trap lines in the immediate vicinity of the cabin, returning with rabbits or the occasional pine marten. He cooked simple but hearty meals, kept the fire blazing constantly, and made sure Katherine had everything she needed while maintaining a respectful distance. The cabin was a single room, which meant privacy was limited. Xavier had given Katherine his bed and made himself a pallet near the fire, refusing any argument on the matter. At first, Katherine had protested, but he had simply said, "You are recovering from near death. I have slept in worse places," and that was the end of it. By the 3rd day, Katherine felt strong enough to move around the cabin. Her fingers and toes still ached, but Xavier assured her that was a good sign, that there was no lasting damage. She found herself helping with small tasks, preparing vegetables for stew, mending a tear in one of his shirts. "You do not have to do that," Xavier said, watching her work. "I need to do something," Katherine replied. "I cannot just sit idle while you do everything. You are a guest." "I am an imposition," Katherine corrected. "The least I can do is make myself useful." A ghost of a smile crossed Xavier's face. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it transformed his features, making him look younger, almost boyish. "You are not an imposition," he said quietly. "It is nice having someone to talk to. Do you really not mind the solitude?" Katherine asked, curious. "Living up here alone, I mean." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I came up here 5 years ago," he finally said. "I was working as a scout for the army, and I saw things that made me question everything. The way we treated the tribes, the violence, the broken promises. I could not be part of it anymore, so I left, came up into these mountains and built this cabin. At first, the quiet was maddening. I was used to orders, structure, purpose. But eventually, I learned to appreciate the silence. The mountains do not judge, do not ask things of you that violate your conscience." "That sounds like a lonely way to live," Katherine said softly. "Maybe," Xavier admitted. "But it is honest. I hunt what I need, trade what I can, hurt no one. It is a small life, but it is mine." Katherine studied him, this big, quiet man who had saved her life. "Do you ever think about going back? To civilization, I mean." "Sometimes," Xavier said. "But then I think about the crowds, the noise, the way people treat each other when they are all pressed together. Up here, I can be myself. Down there, I was always trying to be something I was not." "What were you trying to be?" Xavier met her eyes. "Harder than I am. Meaner. The army values those things, especially in its scouts, but I never had the stomach for unnecessary cruelty. That made me a liability eventually." "I think that makes you a good man," Katherine said. Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a softening around his eyes. "You barely know me. I know you saved my life when you could have left me to die. I know you gave me your bed and have treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. That tells me what kind of man you are." The conversation drifted to other topics after that. Katherine told him about Boston, about her life as a seamstress before her father had died and money had become tight. She told him about her brother Thomas, who had gone west seeking fortune and had ended up working for a mining company. She told him about her mother, who worried constantly about both her children being so far from home. In turn, Xavier shared small pieces of his past. He had grown up in Missouri, the son of a farmer. He had joined the army at 20, seeking adventure and escape from the endless drudgery of farm work. He had been a scout for 8 years before he could not stomach it anymore. He had family back in Missouri still, parents and 2 younger sisters, but he had not seen them in years. "Do they know where you are?" Katherine asked. "They know I am alive and in Wyoming territory," Xavier said. "I write occasionally, though I am not much for letters. They want me to come home, but I cannot, not yet." "Cannot or will not?" Xavier smiled slightly. "A bit of both, I suppose." The storm continued to rage outside, the wind howling like a living thing. Katherine found herself grateful for the cabin's solid walls, for the warmth of the fire, and increasingly, for Xavier's presence. There was something comforting about the way he moved through the small space, confident and capable. She felt safe with him, safer than she had felt in a long time. On the 4th night, Katherine woke from a nightmare, gasping. In her dream, she had been back in the snow, freezing, dying, and no one had come to save her. She sat up, heart pounding, disoriented. "Katherine," Xavier's voice came from the darkness near the fire. "Are you all right?" "Just a dream," she managed. "I am sorry for waking you." She heard him stand, and then he was stirring the fire, coaxing it back to life. The flames cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Xavier approached the bed slowly, as if not wanting to startle her. "The mind sometimes relives trauma," he said gently. "I have had my share of nightmares over the years. About the army, about what I saw, what I did," Xavier confirmed. "It gets better with time, but some images never fully leave." Katherine pulled the blankets tighter around herself. Now that she was fully awake, she felt foolish for her fear. "I dreamed I was back in the snow and no one found me. But I did find you," Xavier said. "You are safe here." "I know," Katherine said. "It is just hard to convince my sleeping mind of that." Xavier hesitated, then said, "When I have nightmares, I find it helps to remember something good, a memory that makes me feel peaceful." "What do you think of?" Katherine asked. "My mother's kitchen," Xavier said, a slight smile crossing his face. "The way it smelled when she baked bread. The sound of my sisters laughing. Simple things, but they remind me that good exists in the world." Katherine closed her eyes, thinking. "I think of my father reading to us by the fire. He had the most wonderful voice, deep and soothing. He would read from whatever book we had, and for those moments it felt like nothing bad could ever happen." "Hold on to that," Xavier said. "When the nightmares come, remember that feeling." "Thank you," Katherine whispered. Xavier nodded and returned to his pallet by the fire. Katherine lay back down, and this time, when sleep found her, it was peaceful. By the 6th day, the storm had finally blown itself out. The world outside the cabin was transformed, buried under several feet of snow. Xavier ventured out to check on conditions and returned with the news that travel would be impossible for at least another week. "The snow is too deep," he explained. "Even with snowshoes, it would be treacherous. We need to wait for it to settle and compact a bit." Katherine knew she should have been frustrated by the delay, worried about her brother wondering where she was. But instead, she felt a strange sense of contentment. The cabin had become a small world unto itself, warm and safe, and she found herself reluctant to leave it. She and Xavier had fallen into an easy routine. They cooked together, shared meals, talked about everything and nothing. Katherine discovered that Xavier had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable. He made observations about the world that were both funny and insightful, and she found herself laughing more than she had in months. "You are different than when I first woke up," Katherine observed one evening as they sat by the fire, Xavier carving a piece of wood while she mended another of his shirts. "How so?" Xavier asked, not looking up from his work. "Less guarded," Katherine said. "More willing to talk." Xavier was quiet for a moment, his knife working smoothly over the wood. "I suppose I am out of practice being around people. It takes me a while to remember how." "I am glad you are remembering," Katherine said softly. Xavier looked up at that, meeting her eyes. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. "I am too," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Katherine's heart skip. She looked away, focusing on her sewing. When had Xavier Cunningham become handsome to her? When had his presence started making her pulse quicken? She told herself it was just gratitude, the natural attachment one feels towards someone who saved their life. But she knew it was more than that. The next morning, Katherine woke to find Xavier already up and moving about the cabin with unusual energy. "I need to check the far trapline today," he said when he noticed she was awake. "I have put it off as long as I can. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" "Of course," Katherine said, sitting up. "I am not an invalid." "I know," Xavier said quickly. "I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable with it." "I will be fine," Katherine assured him. "Just be careful out there." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes at her concern. "I will," he promised. After he left, the cabin felt empty in a way it had not before. Katherine busied herself with tidying up, preparing food for when Xavier returned, anything to keep her mind occupied. She found herself going to the window repeatedly, looking out at the vast expanse of white, watching for his return. When Xavier finally came back in the early afternoon, Katherine felt a rush of relief that was far too intense to be casual concern. Successful trip. she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "Found 3 marten and a fox," Xavier reported, holding up the pelts. "Good haul." He paused, studying her face. "Were you worried?" Katherine considered lying, then decided against it. "A little. I realized I would have no idea what to do if something happened to you out there." "Nothing happened," Xavier said gently. "I have been running these trap lines for 5 years. I know every rock and tree within 10 miles of this cabin." "I know," Katherine said, "but still." Xavier set down the pelts and crossed to where she stood. He was close enough that she could feel the cold still radiating from his coat, could see the snowflakes melting in his hair and beard. "Katherine," he said quietly, "I am not going anywhere." It was the way he said it, the intensity in his eyes, that made Katherine realize they were no longer just talking about his safety on the trap line. Something was building between them, something neither of them had quite acknowledged yet. "Good," Katherine whispered. "Because I would be very cross if you did." A smile tugged at Xavier's lips. "We cannot have that." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then Xavier stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should get these pelts processed before they freeze solid." Katherine watched him move away, her heart pounding. What was happening to her? She had known this man for barely a week, and yet she felt more connected to him than to men she had known for years back in Boston. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Xavier said, "Tell me about Boston. What was your life like there?" Katherine considered the question. "Busy," she finally said. "Always noise, always people. I worked as a seamstress in a shop on Tremont Street. The work was steady but tiring. Long hours, demanding clients. When my father was alive, it felt more bearable because I knew I was helping provide for the family. After he died, it just felt endless." "Is that why you agreed to come west?" Xavier asked. "Partly," Katherine admitted. "Thomas wrote that there were opportunities out here, that I could make more money in the mining camps doing mending and such. But mostly, I just wanted a change. I wanted to see something beyond the same streets I had walked my entire life." "Do you regret coming?" Xavier asked quietly. Katherine looked at him, at the firelight dancing in his eyes, at the strong, kind face that had become so familiar to her. "No," she said honestly. "Even with everything that happened, even with the driver dying, I do not regret it. Is that terrible of me?" "No," Xavier said. "It is honest. We cannot change the past, only choose how we move forward." "What about you?" Katherine asked. "Do you regret leaving the army, coming up here?" Xavier thought about it for a long moment. "I regret that it took me so long to leave. I should have walked away years earlier, before I saw and did things that still haunt me. But coming here, building this life, no, I do not regret that." "Do you think you will ever want to go back to civilization?" "I used to think not," Xavier said slowly. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life up here, trapping and hunting until I was too old to manage, then probably dying alone in this cabin some winter." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Lately, I have been thinking that maybe there is more to life than just surviving." Katherine's breath caught. "What changed?" Xavier held her gaze. "You know what changed?" The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Katherine felt her pulse racing, her hands trembling slightly. "Xavier, you do not have to say anything," Xavier interrupted gently. "I know you are planning to go to your brother, that you have a life waiting elsewhere. I am not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know that having you here, these past days, it has reminded me what I have been missing." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "It has reminded me too," she whispered. "I did not realize how lonely I was until I was not anymore." They stared at each other across the small space of the cabin, and Katherine felt as if they were balanced on the edge of something momentous. Then Xavier stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "It is late," he said, his voice slightly rough. "We should get some sleep." Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice. As she settled into the bed and Xavier banked the fire, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. What was she going to do? She could not stay here indefinitely. She had to get to her brother, had to let him know she was alive. But the thought of leaving this cabin, of leaving Xavier, felt like tearing something essential from her chest. The next morning brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that turned the snow-covered landscape into a blinding expanse of white. Xavier announced that he could make it to Shoshone City on snowshoes and would go to send a telegram to Katherine's brother, letting him know she was safe. "Tell him I will come to Dead Horse Camp as soon as the trails are passable," Katherine said. "He must be worried sick." "I will tell him," Xavier promised. He hesitated at the door, one hand on the latch. "Katherine, when the trail's clear, if you wanted to stay a bit longer before going to your brother, you would be welcome." Katherine felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I would like that." Xavier's smile was brief but genuine. "Good, I will be back before dark." Alone in the cabin once more, Katherine found herself thinking seriously about her future. She had planned to stay with Thomas for a few months, work in the mining camp, save money. Then what? Return to Boston. The thought held no appeal. Start somewhere new. That seemed more reasonable, but where? Her thoughts kept circling back to Xavier, to the way her heart lifted when he entered the cabin, to the contentment she felt in his presence. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt inevitable, like recognizing something she had always known. But what future could they have? Xavier lived in a cabin in the wilderness. Katherine knew nothing about mountain living, about surviving in such isolation. And yet, the thought of leaving, of never seeing him again, was unbearable. When Xavier returned that evening, his face was serious. "I sent the telegram. Your brother was in town, actually, and I spoke with him directly. He was relieved to hear you are alive." The stagecoach company had sent word about the accident, and he feared the worst. "Oh, Thomas," Katherine murmured. "He must have been frantic." "He wants to come fetch you as soon as possible," Xavier continued. "I told him the trails would be clear enough in about a week, maybe less if we get more good weather." A week. Katherine had one more week in this cabin with Xavier before her real life intruded. "What is he like, my brother?" she asked. "You met him. What was your impression?" Xavier smiled slightly. "Worried about you. Protective. He gave me a rather thorough interrogation about the conditions of the cabin, how I was treating you, whether you were truly all right. I think he wanted to set out immediately, weather be damned, but I convinced him that you were recovering and comfortable." "Thank you," Katherine said. "Thomas can be overprotective sometimes." "He loves you," Xavier said simply. "That is not something to apologize for." That night, Katherine lay awake long after Xavier had fallen asleep. She could hear his steady breathing from across the cabin, see the outline of his form in the dying firelight. A week was not enough time. She needed more, needed to understand what was growing between them, needed to explore these feelings that had taken root in her heart. The next few days took on a bittersweet quality. Katherine and Xavier were both aware of time slipping away, of the limited hours they had left together. They talked more, shared more, as if trying to fit a lifetime of conversation into the days remaining. Xavier taught Katherine how to identify animal tracks in the snow, how to tell which trees made the best firewood, how to read the weather by watching the clouds. Katherine shared stories of Boston, of plays she had seen and books she had read, of the small moments that made up a city life. "I wish I had more time," Katherine said one evening as they sat by the fire. "There is so much I do not know about you yet." "What do you want to know?" Xavier asked. "Everything," Katherine said honestly. "What makes you laugh, what makes you sad, what you dream about when you let yourself dream." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "I laugh at silly things," he finally said. "The way squirrels chatter at each other, the antics of fox kits in spring. I am sad when I think about opportunities lost, about the years I wasted trying to be something I was not, and my dreams have changed recently." "How so?" Xavier met her eyes. "I used to dream about peace, about quiet. Now I dream about having someone to share it with." Katherine felt her throat tighten. "Xavier, I do not want to leave." "I do not want you to leave either," Xavier admitted. "But I will not ask you to stay. This life, this cabin, it is hard, lonely. You deserve better than scratching out an existence in the mountains." "Maybe I should decide what I deserve," Katherine said, a bit of heat entering her voice. "Maybe you should," Xavier agreed. "But you should make that decision with all the facts. You have only seen this place in winter, only seen it with me taking care of everything. You do not know what the isolation feels like month after month. You do not know what it is like when the supplies run low, when you are snowed in for weeks at a time, when the nearest human being is miles away." "Then let me learn," Katherine said. "Let me stay longer, see what this life is really like." Xavier shook his head slowly. "Your brother is coming for you. He has already made arrangements." "Then I will tell him I am not ready to leave yet," Katherine said stubbornly. "Katherine, do you want me to stay?" she interrupted. "Honestly, do you want me to leave or do you want me here?" Xavier stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the cabin like a caged animal. Finally, he turned to face her. "Of course I want you to stay. I want it so badly it frightens me, but I cannot be selfish with your life. You have a family, opportunities, a future. I am just a man living alone in the mountains." Katherine stood as well, crossing to him. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You are the man who saved my life. You are the man who has shown me more kindness in 2 weeks than most people show in a lifetime. You are the man I am falling in love with." Xavier's breath caught. "Katherine, you do not mean that." "It is gratitude. The intensity of our situation. Do not tell me what I feel," Katherine said firmly. "I know my own heart. I am 23 years old, not a child. I have met plenty of men, and none of them ever made me feel the way you do. How do I make you feel?" Xavier asked, his voice rough. "Safe," Katherine said. "Seen. Like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings have worth. When I am with you, I do not feel like I am playing a part or trying to be what someone else wants. I just feel like myself." Xavier raised one hand slowly, cupping her cheek. His palm was rough and warm against her skin. "You matter more than you know," he said quietly. "You have brought light into this cabin, into my life. But I need you to be sure, Katherine. If you stay, if we pursue this, there is no guarantee it will work. This life is hard." "I do not need guarantees," Katherine said. "I just need a chance." Xavier searched her face, and Katherine could see the war in his eyes, fear battling hope. Then slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. Katherine answered by rising on her toes, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. Xavier's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened. Katherine felt warmth flood through her, a sense of rightness that went bone deep. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I am afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid of wanting this too much, afraid of not being enough for you." "You are enough," Katherine said fiercely. "More than enough." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, while the fire crackled and the night settled around them. Finally, Xavier said, "When your brother comes, you should go with him. Spend some time at Dead Horse Camp, see him, think about what you really want. If you still want to come back here after that, then we can talk about what the future might look like." Katherine wanted to argue, but she could see the wisdom in his words. "How long?" she asked. "A month," Xavier said. Spend a month with your brother. If you still want this life, want me at the end of that time, then I will be here waiting." "A month is a long time," Katherine said. "It is nothing compared to forever," Xavier replied. "And if we are going to do this, Katherine, it has to be forever. I am not a man who does things halfway." "Neither am I," Katherine said. "All right, 1 month. But Xavier, I know my heart will not change." "Then a month will pass quickly," Xavier said and kissed her again. The remaining days before Thomas arrived passed both too quickly and too slowly. Katherine and Xavier existed in a strange bubble, aware of the growing feelings between them, but also conscious of the impending separation. They kissed often, held each other by the fire, talked long into the night about dreams and fears and hopes. Xavier told her about his sisters, Mary and Anne, who would be grown women now. He spoke of missing them, of wondering if they were married, if they had children. Katherine told him about the mother she had left behind in Boston, proud and strong, who had raised 2 children alone after her husband's death. "She would like you," Katherine said one evening. "My mother. She always said character matters more than circumstance. Will you tell her about me?" Xavier asked. "In your letters?" "Yes," Katherine said. "I will tell her I met a man who saved my life in more ways than one." When Thomas Jefferson arrived on a cold, clear morning 8 days after Katherine had been found, he embraced his sister with tears in his eyes. "Kate, thank God," he said, holding her tight. "When I heard about the accident, I thought I had lost you." "I am fine, Tommy," Katherine assured him, using the childhood nickname. "Thanks to Mr. Cunningham." Thomas turned to Xavier, extending his hand. "I can never repay you for what you have done, sir. You have my eternal gratitude." Xavier shook his hand firmly. "Your sister is a remarkable woman. I am glad I was able to help." Thomas was a younger, slighter version of Katherine, with the same dark hair and brown eyes, though his were shadowed with exhaustion and relief. He looked between his sister and Xavier with a perceptive gaze that suggested he saw more than either of them might like. "We should get you to Dead Horse Camp," Thomas said to Katherine. "I have a room arranged at the boarding house. It is not much, but it is warm and dry." Katherine nodded, but her eyes were on Xavier. He stood slightly apart, his expression carefully neutral, but she could see the tightness around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "I need a few minutes to gather my things," Katherine said. "Thomas, could you prepare the horse?" Once they were alone, Katherine turned to Xavier. 1 month, she said quietly. 1 month, Xavier confirmed. "Katherine, if you change your mind, if you decide this life is not for you, I will understand." "I will not change my mind," Katherine said. She stepped close, pressing a quick kiss to his lips. "Wait for me." "Always," Xavier promised. The ride to Dead Horse Camp was slow and cold, giving Katherine and Thomas plenty of time to talk. Her brother filled her in on his work, on the state of the mining operation, on the rough characters that populated the camp. "It is no place for a lady, really," Thomas said. "But there is good money to be made doing laundry and mending for the miners. They pay well for services they cannot do themselves." "I am not afraid of hard work," Katherine said. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "Kate, what is between you and Cunningham?" Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "What makes you think there is anything?" "The way you look at each other," Thomas said dryly. "The way he watched you like you might disappear if he blinked." "The way you kissed him when you thought I could not see," Katherine sighed. "I care for him, Tommy, more than I should after such a short time, perhaps, but I do." "Do you plan to go back to him?" "Yes," Katherine said simply. "After a month. He wants me to be sure, to understand what kind of life it would be." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "He seems like a good man, steady, the kind who keeps his word. But Kate, that life, living in the mountains, it would be so different from anything you have known." "I know," Katherine said, "but different does not mean wrong. Tommy, for the first time in years, I feel like I have found something worth fighting for." "Then I hope it works out," Thomas said simply. "You deserve happiness, Kate. God knows you have had little enough of it." Dead Horse Camp was as rough as Thomas had warned. It was less a town and more a collection of hastily built structures centered around the mine entrance. The boarding house was a two-story building with thin walls and thinner mattresses, but it was clean and Katherine had her own small room. She spent her first week getting oriented, meeting the other residents of the camp, setting up her sewing supplies. Word spread quickly that there was a skilled seamstress in camp, and soon Katherine had more work than she could handle. The miners were desperate for mending, for patches, for buttons sewn back on shirts. They paid well, often in silver coins or small nuggets of gold. Thomas introduced her to the camp's few other women, wives of engineers and supervisors who had braved the frontier. They were kind but wary, as if unsure what to make of this educated Boston woman who had ended up in their midst. Katherine threw herself into the work, partly because she needed the money and partly because it kept her mind occupied. But every night, as she lay in her narrow bed, she thought of Xavier alone in his cabin. She wondered what he was doing, if he was thinking of her, if he doubted that she would return. 2 weeks into her stay, a letter arrived from her mother in Boston. Thomas had written to her about Katherine's accident and survival, and now her mother's worried words filled 3 pages of closely written script. She begged Katherine to return to Boston, to give up this foolish Western adventure, to come home where she would be safe. Katherine sat in her room, staring at the letter, and realized she had no desire to return to Boston. The city that had been her whole world now felt distant, irrelevant. Her life was here now, in the raw mountains of Wyoming territory, in the possibility of a future with a man who made her heart sing. She wrote back to her mother, trying to explain, knowing it would be difficult for her to understand. Katherine told her about Xavier, about the cabin, about the feelings growing in her heart. She told her mother that she had found something precious and rare, and she could not turn her back on it. 3 weeks into her stay at Dead Horse Camp, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. The work was satisfying, and she enjoyed her brother's company, but she missed Xavier with an ache that went beyond simple longing. She missed his quiet presence, his dry humor, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "You are going back to him," Thomas said one evening. It was not a question. "Yes," Katherine confirmed, "as soon as the month is up." Thomas nodded slowly. "I thought so." "Will you marry him, if he asks?" Katherine said. "And I think he will." "What kind of life will you have?" Thomas asked, not unkindly. "He lives in a cabin miles from anywhere. You will be isolated, dependent on him for everything." "No," Katherine corrected gently. "We will be dependent on each other. That is what marriage is supposed to be, is it not? A partnership?" "I suppose it is," Thomas admitted. "I just worry about you, Kate." "I know," Katherine said, "but I need you to trust me on this. Xavier is a good man and I love him. That is enough for me." The night before Katherine was due to return to Xavier's cabin, Thomas gave her a small leather pouch heavy with coins. "Your wages," he said, "and a bit extra. I have been saving for you. It is not a fortune, but it is a start." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Tommy, you did not have to do this." "I know," Thomas said, "but I want you to have something of your own, something independent, just in case." "In case what?" Katherine asked. "In case you ever need it," Thomas said quietly. "I trust Cunningham seems like a decent man, but you should always have resources of your own. Promise me you will keep this somewhere safe." "I promise," Katherine said, hugging her brother tight. "Thank you, Tommy, for everything." The next morning, Thomas rode with Katherine back toward Xavier's cabin. The weather was clear and cold, but the trails were passable now. As they drew closer to the familiar landmarks, Katherine felt her heart begin to race with anticipation. When the cabin finally came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, Katherine felt as if her heart might burst. Xavier emerged from the cabin as they approached, and even from a distance, Katherine could see the tension drain from his shoulders when he saw her. "1 month," she called out as soon as she was close enough. "Just like we agreed." Xavier's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You came back." "Did you doubt I would?" Katherine asked, sliding down from her horse. "Every day," Xavier admitted. "Every single day." Thomas cleared his throat. "Mr. Cunningham, my sister tells me she intends to stay with you. I need to know your intentions are honorable." "They are," Xavier said, his eyes never leaving Katherine's face. "I intend to marry her if she will have me." "Then you have my blessing," Thomas said. "Though I warn you, if you hurt her, you will answer to me." "Fair enough," Xavier said. Then to Katherine, "I do not have a ring, and this is not how I plan to do this, but Katherine Jefferson, will you marry me?" Katherine laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes." Xavier closed the distance between them and swept her into his arms, kissing her soundly. When they finally broke apart, Thomas was grinning despite himself. "I suppose I should head back to camp," he said. "But Kate, you will write. Let me know how you are doing." "I will," Katherine promised. "And you are always welcome here, Tommy. Always." After Thomas had ridden away, Xavier and Katherine stood together in front of the cabin, his arms around her from behind, looking out at the snow-covered mountains. "Are you sure about this?" Xavier asked quietly. "It is not too late to change your mind." "I am absolutely sure," Katherine said, leaning back against his chest. "This is where I belong, with you." "I will do everything in my power to make you happy," Xavier promised. "You already do," Katherine said. They were married 3 weeks later in Shoshone City, in a simple ceremony performed by the local preacher. Thomas stood as witness, along with the woman who ran the general store and her husband, who Xavier traded with regularly. Katherine wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, and Xavier had gotten a haircut and trimmed his beard, though he still looked every inch the mountain man he was. After the ceremony, they celebrated with a modest dinner at the town's only restaurant. Thomas gave a toast that made Katherine cry, wishing them long life and happiness. Then Xavier and Katherine rode back to the cabin to begin their life together in earnest. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Katherine had to learn the rhythms of mountain life, the endless tasks required to survive in the wilderness. Xavier taught her how to cure meat, how to preserve vegetables, how to recognize the signs of changing weather. She learned to snowshoe, to handle a rifle, to set snares for rabbits. It was hard work, harder than anything Katherine had done in Boston. But it was also satisfying in a way city life had never been. She could see the direct results of her labor in the food they ate, the warmth of the cabin, the growing stores they put by for winter. Xavier, for his part, seemed to blossom with Katherine's presence. The solitary man Katherine had first met gave way to someone more open, more willing to share his thoughts and feelings. He talked to her constantly as they worked side by side, sharing observations about the weather, the wildlife, the changing seasons. At night, they lay together in the big bed, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked about their dreams for the future. Xavier spoke of maybe building a larger cabin, of perhaps raising some chickens, of teaching any future children the ways of the mountains. Katherine shared her hopes for maintaining contact with her family, for maybe making trips to Shoshone City more regularly to stay connected to the wider world. "I do not want to lose ourselves entirely to isolation," Katherine said one night. I love our life here, but I also think it is important to remember we are part of a larger community. I agree, Xavier said. I think that was part of my problem before, cutting myself off completely. With you here, I see the value in maintaining connections, in not being entirely alone. Spring came, and with it, a transformation of the mountain landscape. The snow melted to reveal meadows full of wildflowers. Xavier taught Katherine the names of the plants, which ones were edible, which ones had medicinal properties. They spent long days exploring the mountains together, and Katherine fell more in love with both the land and her husband. In May, Katherine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She was going to have a baby, miles from any doctor, with only Xavier to help her. But when she told him, Xavier's face lit up with such pure happiness that her fears receded. "We will manage," he assured her. "There is a midwife in Shoshone City, Mrs. Fletcher. We can bring her up here when the time comes, or we can go to town if you prefer." "I want to have the baby here," Katherine said, "in our home." Xavier pulled her close, resting his hand on her still flat stomach. "Then that is what we will do." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Katherine continued to work alongside Xavier through the summer months, though he insisted she rest more than she wanted. He fussed over her constantly, worrying about her health, making sure she ate enough, that she was not overdoing things. "I am not made of glass," Katherine protested one afternoon when Xavier tried to take over the task of carrying water from the creek. "I know," Xavier said, "but humor me. I have never been a father before. I am allowed to worry." Katherine softened, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. "We are both new at this," she said gently. "We will figure it out together." In late summer, Thomas visited, bringing news from Dead Horse Camp and letters from Boston. Their mother had written to both of them, expressing her worry about Katherine's pregnancy so far from civilization, but also her joy at the prospect of a grandchild. She had sent a package of baby clothes and blankets, lovingly made. Thomas stayed for a week, and Xavier taught him some of the skills of mountain living. The two men grew closer, bonding over the shared goal of taking care of Katherine. By the time Thomas left, he and Xavier had developed a genuine friendship. "Take care of my sister," Thomas said as he prepared to ride out. "With my life," Xavier replied. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and red, Katherine's belly grew round. She felt the baby move inside her, and each kick filled her with wonder. Xavier would lay his hand on her stomach in the evenings, marveling at the life they had created together. "What do you hope for?" Katherine asked one night. "Boy or girl?" "Healthy," Xavier said immediately. "That is all I care about, you both healthy and safe. But if you had to choose?" Xavier smiled. "I do not care, truly. Though I confess the idea of a daughter with your spirit terrifies and delights me in equal measure." In November, as the first snows began to fall, Xavier rode to Shoshone City to fetch Mrs. Fletcher, the midwife. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s who had delivered half the babies in the region. She took one look at Katherine and declared she had another few weeks yet. "First babies take their time," Mrs. Fletcher said. "I will stay here until the child comes." "I hope you have enough supplies to feed an extra mouth, Mr. Cunningham." "More than enough," Xavier assured her. Mrs. Fletcher was good company. She told stories of her years on the frontier, of the many births she had attended, some routine and some dramatic. She reassured Katherine about what to expect, answering questions Katherine had been too embarrassed to ask Xavier. The baby came on a cold December morning, exactly 2 days before Christmas. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Xavier, pacing outside in the cold dawn, feared he would lose them both. But Katherine was strong, stronger than either he or Mrs. Fletcher had anticipated. When the baby's first cry split the air, Xavier felt tears stream down his face. Mrs. Fletcher opened the cabin door a few minutes later, grinning. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy with a set of lungs on him, and your wife is tired but well. Come meet your son, Mr. Cunningham." Xavier entered the cabin to find Katherine propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. When she looked up at him, her smile outshone the sun. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Xavier approached slowly, almost afraid to touch something so small and precious. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in the air, his face red from crying. When Xavier carefully took him from Katherine, the baby quieted, seeming to sense his father's presence. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered, awestruck. "You are perfect. Thank you, Katherine. Thank you for this gift." "Thank you for finding me," Katherine said. "For saving me, for loving me, for giving me this life." They named the boy William Thomas Cunningham, after Xavier's father and Katherine's brother. He was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both awake at odd hours and filled the cabin with new sounds and smells. Xavier took to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, learning to change diapers and soothe a crying infant with surprising skill. Mrs. Fletcher stayed for 2 weeks, making sure both Katherine and the baby were thriving. Before she left, she pulled Xavier aside. "Your wife is stronger than she looks," the midwife said. "She will do just fine up here, but keep an eye on her these first few months. New mothers can sometimes get melancholy, especially in the isolation of winter. Make sure she knows she is not alone." Xavier took the advice to heart, being extra attentive to Katherine in the weeks that followed. But his concern proved unnecessary. Katherine bloomed in motherhood, finding joy in every small milestone, every coo and smile from their son. Winter settled around them, but the cabin that had once housed one lonely man now rang with the sounds of family. Katherine sang lullabies as she rocked William to sleep. Xavier carved small wooden toys during the long evenings. They took turns walking the cabin floor with a fussy baby, supporting each other through the exhaustion of new parenthood. Christmas came, and though they could not make it to church or town, they celebrated quietly. Xavier had managed to get small gifts during his last trip to Shoshone City before William's birth, a new shawl for Katherine and a silver locket. Katherine had sewn Xavier a new shirt from fabric she had been hoarding. Their best gift, though, was William himself, healthy and thriving. "A year ago I was alone," Xavier said as they sat by the fire on Christmas night, William asleep in Katherine's arms. "I thought I would always be alone. Now I have everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know to want." "We found each other," Katherine said. "That is the real miracle. That you were there that day, that you found me in all that snow. What are the odds?" "Some things are meant to be," Xavier said, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "I do not question it. I just thank God every day that you came into my life." As winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer, the Cunningham family settled into the rhythms of their life. William grew quickly, a robust baby with his father's blue-green eyes and his mother's dark hair. Katherine taught Xavier to really cook beyond his simple mountain fare, and he taught her to fish and track game. Thomas visited several times a year, always bringing news from the outside world and letters from Boston. Katherine's mother wrote regularly now, her initial fears giving way to tentative acceptance of her daughter's choices. She sent packages for William, spoiling her grandson from afar. In the fall of 1880, when William was nearly 2 years old, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because her body had adapted to the demands of mountain life. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Ann Cunningham, was born on a warm May morning with less drama than her brother's arrival. Mrs. Fletcher attended again, declaring it the easiest birth she had seen in years. "Your wife is built for this," the midwife told Xavier. "You two planning a whole houseful." Xavier and Katherine exchanged glances and laughed. "We will see what God provides," Katherine said. With 2 children, the cabin felt smaller, and Xavier began planning an addition. Over the next year, with Thomas's help during his visits, they built 2 more rooms onto the cabin, giving them more space and privacy. Xavier also built a small barn for the chickens they had acquired, and the 2 goats that provided milk. The isolated cabin was becoming a homestead, and the lonely mountain man was now a husband and father, deeply embedded in a life he loved. In 1882, their 3rd child arrived, another boy they named Samuel Joseph. Katherine joked that they would need to add another room soon, but Xavier just smiled and said he would build whatever she needed. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, summers when the heat was oppressive, seasons when money was tight. But through it all, Xavier and Katherine faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each challenge overcome. Thomas eventually married a woman from Cheyenne, a schoolteacher named Margaret, and they moved to Shoshone City, where Thomas took a job with a surveying company. Having family nearby made Katherine even happier, and the 2 families visited often. Katherine's mother never did travel west to meet her grandchildren, but the letters flowed steadily between Boston and Wyoming, maintaining that connection across the miles. Years passed. William grew into a serious boy who loved learning about the mountains from his father. Grace was spirited and adventurous, always testing boundaries. Samuel was the peacemaker, gentle and kind. The Cunningham cabin rang with the sounds of childhood, laughter and tears, games and lessons. Xavier taught his children everything he knew about the mountains, about respect for the land and the creatures that shared it. Katherine taught them to read and write, using books she ordered from catalogs, determined they would have education despite their isolation. In 1885, Xavier and Katherine celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a rare trip to Shoshone City, leaving the children with Thomas and Margaret. They stayed at the town's small hotel, ate at the restaurant, and danced at the local social hall to music from a traveling band. "Do you ever regret it?" Xavier asked as they danced. Giving up the possibilities of city life for this, Katherine looked at her husband, at the face she had loved for a decade, now more weathered but still dear. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a life I never knew I wanted, a life I would not trade for anything." "You gave me a reason to live," Xavier said. "Before you, I was just existing, surviving. You taught me how to truly be alive." They kissed there in the social hall, not caring who saw, 2 people still deeply in love after a decade of marriage. The children grew. William, at 14, was already as tall as his father and equally quiet. He spoke of becoming a guide, leading hunting parties into the mountains. Grace, at 12, was determined to be a writer, filling journals with observations about their mountain life. Samuel, at 10, loved animals and talked about becoming a veterinarian, though he had only the vaguest idea of what that would entail. In 1890, Thomas and Margaret's son Peter came to stay with the Cunninghams for the summer. The boy was city-bred and soft, and Thomas hoped Xavier could toughen him up a bit. By summer's end, Peter had learned to hunt and fish, and had developed a deep respect for his uncle and the life he led. Katherine was 41 that year, and Xavier was 42. They had been married for 15 years, and the love between them had only deepened. They had built a life together in the mountains, raised 3 children, created a home that was a haven against the wilderness. One evening, sitting on the porch they had built onto the cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains while their children played in the yard, Xavier took Catherine's hand. "You remember the day I found you?" he asked. "Every detail," Catherine said. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then I remember your face when I woke up. I thought you were the most terrifying man I had ever seen." Xavier laughed. "Terrifying? You are very large," Catherine said, smiling, "and you had this intense stare. But then you were so gentle, so kind." "You saved my life, Xavier, in every way a person can be saved." "You saved mine too," Xavier said. "I did not even realize I needed saving until you came along. You gave me purpose, family, love. Everything I have, everything I am is because of you." "We saved each other," Catherine said. "That is what love does." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Their children's laughter echoed across the yard. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, carrying the scent of dinner cooking. Everything was peaceful, perfect in its simplicity. In 1895, William married a girl from Shoshone City, a rancher's daughter named Emma who was not afraid of hard work. They built a cabin on land adjacent to Xavier and Catherine's, starting their own homestead. Grace left for Denver to attend a school for young women, determined to become a journalist. Samuel stayed home, helping his father with the trap lines and dreaming of studying animal medicine. Catherine and Xavier became grandparents in 1896, when William and Emma had a son they named after Xavier. Holding his grandson, Xavier felt the circle of life complete itself. He had gone from being alone to being the patriarch of a growing family, and the weight of that blessing sometimes overwhelmed him. "Are you happy?" Catherine asked him one night after they had returned from visiting William's family. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Xavier said. "You have given me everything, Catherine. A family, a purpose, a life worth living." "We gave it to each other," Catherine corrected gently. In 1898, Grace returned from Denver with a job offer from a newspaper in Cheyenne. She would be covering stories about frontier life, writing articles about the changing West. Catherine was proud beyond measure of her daughter's accomplishments, though she missed her terribly. Samuel, at 18, decided to apprentice with the veterinarian in Shoshone City. He would live with Thomas and Margaret during his training, returning home on weekends and holidays. Catherine found the cabin too quiet without her youngest child's gentle presence. "The house feels so empty," she said to Xavier one evening. "They are living their lives," Xavier said. "That is what we raised them to do." "I know," Catherine said. "I am proud of them, all of them. I just miss having them all here." "We did well," Xavier said. "Look at what we built, Catherine. 3 strong, capable children making their own ways in the world. That is success." In 1900, Xavier and Catherine celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by family. William and Emma came with their 3 children. Grace arrived from Cheyenne with a young man she was courting, a lawyer named David. Samuel brought his sweetheart, the veterinarian's daughter, Mary. Thomas and Margaret came with their grown children. The cabin and the surrounding yard were filled with people, with laughter and love. Looking around at the gathered family, Catherine felt tears in her eyes. From that day in the blizzard when she had been certain she would die alone, to this moment surrounded by children and grandchildren, the journey had been extraordinary. "Thank you," she whispered to Xavier as they stood together watching their family. "For what?" Xavier asked. "For finding me, for loving me, for this life we built together." Xavier pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for coming back to me after that first month. For choosing this life, for choosing me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine Cunningham," As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, as the family gathered around the fire telling stories and sharing memories, Katherine reflected on the strange path that had led her here. A blizzard that should have killed her had instead led her to the love of her life. The cold that had nearly claimed her had driven her into the arms of a man who had kept her warm ever since, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Xavier had promised he would never let her face the cold again, and he had kept that promise in every way that mattered. He had given her warmth, love, family, a home. He had shown her what it meant to truly be cherished. In 1905, as Katherine turned 51 and Xavier turned 52, they sat together on their porch one autumn evening, much as they had done countless times before. Their children were grown and settled, their grandchildren were thriving, and they had each other, still deeply in love after 27 years of marriage. "If you could go back," Xavier asked, "back to that day in Boston when you decided to travel west, would you change anything?" Katherine considered the question seriously. She thought about the hardships, the struggles, the moments of doubt and fear. She thought about the driver who had died in the coach accident, the sacrifices she had made, the comforts of city life she had left behind. Then she thought about the life she had gained. The love of a good man, children who made her proud, grandchildren who brought joy, a community they had built together. She thought about the mountains she had come to love, the rhythms of the seasons, the satisfaction of a life well lived. "I would not change a single thing," Katherine said firmly. "Every hardship led me here to you, to this life. I would endure it all again in a heartbeat." Xavier smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart so many years ago. "I love you, Katherine Cunningham. I have loved you since the moment you woke up in my bed and looked at me with those fierce brown eyes, determined to survive." "I love you too," Katherine said. "You saved my life, Xavier, and then you made it worth living." They sat together as the stars emerged, as the mountain air turned crisp and cool, as the first snow of the season began to fall. But Katherine was not cold. She had not been truly cold since that day Xavier Cunningham had found her in the blizzard and carried her to safety, to warmth, to love. The snow fell softly, blanketing the mountains in white, but inside the cabin the fire burned bright and warm, just as the love between Katherine and Xavier burned bright and warm, a flame that would never be extinguished, a warmth that would last all their days. And as they sat together, hand in hand, they knew that whatever the future brought, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face it together just as they had faced everything else. Together in the mountains, together in love, together forever. The mountain man had found the woman in the blizzard, and true to his unspoken promise, he had never let her face the cold again. He had given her warmth, love, and a life more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. And in return, she had given him the same. Their love story, born in a blizzard and forged in the wilderness, had become the foundation of a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And if you listened carefully on quiet winter nights, when the snow fell soft and the wind whispered through the pines, you could almost hear their laughter, echoing across the mountains, a testament to a love that had conquered cold, conquered distance, conquered everything. It was a love story for the ages, written in the wild mountains of Wyoming, a tale of survival and devotion, of second chances and found family. And it all began with a blizzard, a dying woman, and a mountain man who refused to let her go.